So as we move into this last session, we'll look at the concluding chapters, and they continue in the same vein, but they also are designed to be a wrap up and a motivation to what's going on in this book. And so, just going to give just kind of an overview of the book as we've gone through it. It starts out in the first chapter, and by the time you get to the 13 to 18, the verses in the first chapter, already there's a big problem. There's something that's bugging the author, who I believe is Solomon. He goes by the name of Kohelet, which is an assembler in the book, and so he's asking why questions. And we see this initial investigation developing the theme in chapters 2 and 3. And basically what he concludes in chapter 3 is that he can't find out the work of God from beginning to end. And I think you will agree that that is a far larger concept than the meaning of life. It includes the meaning of life, but it's all that he's done. And so that's why we've looked at it in terms of being his ultimate quest and struggle and frustration, his understanding the providential workings of God. And that's a task that he ultimately is completely stifled in. In chapters 4 through 8, we looked at details on the inequitable experiences and enigmatic reversals. That's a mouthful, but that's what it's about, and that's our lives are full of those kinds of things where he deals with that. At the end of chapter 8 and into the first part of chapter 9, we have a summary of his findings, and that is that this quest has ultimately failed. Now, it doesn't mean he has failed to teach and so forth, but in terms of the big picture, in terms of understanding things from beginning to end, that has not been successful. We see the report of that task in 8:16 to 17, and then advice in that section in terms of living in the present and living life to its fullest. And that's a strain that runs all the way through the book. And then in chapters 9 and 10, we have some examples, illustrations, clarification, and application. He's still the man who wrote Proverbs, and so he wants to talk about how to live life in the same strain as he does in Proverbs, but with the added aspect, because there's going to be things that don't make sense. And so that's the flavor of those kinds of teaching in the book of Ecclesiastes. In verses 11 or chapters 11 and 12, which we'll look at in a moment, we have final words of motivation, and then in the last few verses of the book, final words of authentication. So this is really a conclusion and wrap up, but it also is a challenge. And again, it's poetry, so there's going to be a lot of things where you scratch your head and, well, okay, what does that mean? And so forth. But it is recoverable, the overall message of the book. So in this section, chapters 11 and the first part of chapter 12, we find Solomon's last words, as they're designed to motivate the reader to not put off acting upon what has been said. And that's an awkward way to say that, but I think that's what it is. You know, throwing a lot of stuff here. Don't put off acting on this, because eventually the opportunity to act will end. Now, that's true about a lot of things in life, isn't it? And we've all learned those kinds of lessons in the hard way. Put off changing my oil another month, another quarter, another year. Whoop, why is the engine not running? Okay. We learn things the hard way sometimes. And we can do that with the truth of the Bible too. God doesn't want us just to understand what it says. He wants us to apply it. And so this last section will be really weighted toward that end. So in the first 6 verses of chapter 11, he's going to use some images to help us avoid the paralysis of action due to uncertainty over the future, to help us not put things off. And so again, it's poetic, and so he's going to give us some images in a literary poetic kind of form. And the first one is on what I think is a commercial metaphor regarding risk. He says, "Cast your bread on the waters, for you shall find it after many days." Now, this is, again, variously handled. You read the commentaries and then just a whole array of possibilities. It's often spoken of in terms of being, generosity, but it's been suggested by other commentators, and I think that it probably makes more sense to take this in the sense of a business venture involving the selling of grain overseas. Now, Israel was not a great, a seafaring country, but they did, involve themselves in commerce, and certainly Solomon as a king and in his world renowned, that would not have been impossible. Because the whole thing of finding it after many days, it easier fits with the commercial image than it does with, be generous and it'll come back to you. That happens, but it's a way that we can see it, whereas with a business venture, it's there. So such a venture would take time, it would involve risk, and so you could see why, let's do something else with grain. Let's not put them on a ship. We know what happens to ships. However, it was sound business, worth the risk. And so, you look at the ships sailing all over the world from the beginning of ships, and it was involved in this. Sometimes the ships are going to sink. Well, I heard about a ship sinking last week. Let's cancel our shipping operations. It's not business. And so you can see he's using this, and he's going to use this as an analogy, not to put off learning and applying what's been taught in the book of Ecclesiastes. He goes on then to another aspect of this. He says, give, or it could be divide a portion to 7, yes, even to 8. For you don't know what, and again, this word ra is often translated evil in translations, and this translation is all the way through the book. But it's usually just misfortune, okay? Like a misfortunate accident or a bad happening or just a bad day. You don't know what misfortune will be on the earth. So again, this is probably in a commercial context as well. So apportioning some resource for investment in a number of different ventures reduces the risk of loss. In other words, what is it in the financial world? What do they call it? Diversification, okay? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Diversify. So if, one investment goes bust, the others, may make up for it. And that's the way life works in the financial realm, and that's what smart investors do. So you can see how, if these are commercial metaphors, regarding risk, okay, regarding risk. And so don't let the risks or the uncertainties of what might happen if you practice what God says, don't be put off with regard to getting a hold of these truths. In the next verses 3 and 4, we have his agricultural image on timing. It says, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falls, there shall it be. He who observes the wind won't sow, and he who regards the clouds won't reap. More straightforward than the previous images, but does take some thinking here about just some of the specifics. In the first part of chapter, or verse 3, he says, clouds are going to deposit their contents at some point, but we don't really know when or how much. I was just being shared with somebody that there's a storm moving through. If you're watching your radar, if you have your phone things, warnings, okay, there's rain coming. Really? What time is it going to hit? Not sure. In a while. How much is going to fall? Don't know. So one of you lives, 6 miles that way, and one of you lives 6 miles that way, and you may get 3 inches down there and none up there. That's just life with rain. So just common sense. Okay? The same thing with wind. Windstorms fell trees in unpredictable ways. Once that tree falls, it can't be replanted. Okay? We say, I can move a tree. I'll just go get a John Deere tree thing and we'll pick it up and we'll move it. This is the ancient world, okay? When a tree fell in a storm, you didn't move it and do anything with it. So just some straightforward things that happen with regard to the world in nature. So verse 4 then is an application of verse 3 when it says, he who observes the wind won't sow. He who regards the clouds won't reap. And so the application is being overly cautious about the wind blowing some seed away while planting will not yield a crop. Now, I've come from planting areas, Iowa, raise corn in Iowa and corn and pigs, and they do a good job at both, especially corn, okay? Corn planters, they stick it in the ground, big thing, they put it in the ground, cover it over, okay? That wasn't the method of ancient sowing. You're going to sow a whole field full of wheat. You didn't take each grain of wheat, put it down and cover it up. You cast it, okay? You cast it, and whatever happened to it. And the Lord tells a parable about the soils with regard to that image, casting seed, and some seed falls here and some falls there. And so, a real windy day, you say, do I want to go out and sow today? Because some of that seed's just going to blow away. And so what he's saying is, if you sit around and let those things paralyze you, you'll never get around to sowing. So, the person who worries too much about the rain will not reap his crop when it's ripe and ready. Same thing with sowing. One of the things, we lived in a Wisconsin, a dairy state, and we lived in the leading dairy county and the leading dairy state in the nation. And so a lot of dairy cows, so a lot of raising of crops to feed those cows, and a lot of making of hay, literally making of hay. And I've been involved in that process in some, small, insignificant ways. But I know that farmers are very careful about when to cut the hay, because it has to lay for enough time for the moisture to leave enough of it so that when you put it in a bale and put it in a barn, it doesn't burn down your barn because of spontaneous combustion and the overheating with the way the process of breakdown works. And so, if it was going to rain for sure today, I'll put off till tomorrow, and so that the hay will have time to dry and they can rake it, pick it up, and so forth. So common agricultural images that are very understandable today in our context, and the point is, don't become paralyzed from taking necessary actions because some potential disaster might ruin the outcome. The Bible is risky sometimes in its application, like how to treat your enemies, or turn the other cheek, and so forth. And you say, okay, I know what God wants me to do, but boy, that's risky. What if it doesn't work? And so it's not talking so much about threats here, but it is making the point that there are various things that will cause us to just not act on what God shows us. We'll just not act on what we see with regard to how do we deal with difficulties. What kinds of intentions do I take into each day with regard to the circumstances that I will find, with regard to the potential outcome of my work. And how do I choose to do this rather than this? When both of them, have potential positive outcomes, and that's going to be covered in motivational ways in this section. So, and agricultural images, these images to help avoid paralysis of action with regard to applying the kinds of things that Solomon has been talking about. When we move to verses 5 and 6, we find a clarifying reminder about uncertainty. As you don't know what is the way of the wind, nor how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, even so you don't know the work of God who does all. Again, that emphasis on all. God does everything. All of the works we see, everything we're involved in, that's all of God, okay? You don't know. In the morning, sow your seed. This is the advice then in the light of that uncertainty. In the morning, sow your seed. In the evening, don't withhold your hand. For you don't know which will prosper, whether this or that, or whether they both will be equally good. So the point here is, just as in the physical world where we see things and processes that are still a mystery to us, so it is with God's works. Now you could be tempted to say in this day and age, well, we do know now how babies form. We understand cell division and all that stuff. Really? We understand, more things, but do we understand the whole? No, we can't go and see all that goes into that. So there is still a mystery in these kinds of just natural natural things. And so this is true with all of God's works. He's working in mysterious ways. And sometimes we can see cause and effect. God says, do this and expect this to happen, and it does. Book of Proverbs. But other times it doesn't, or it's delayed, or it happens in a way we don't recognize yet until we go back and rethink it after the fact. So that's the kind of an image we have here with regard to this ignorance about how things work, why they work. So if we could know all about all of God's activities, then we would always know exactly what to do and when to do it. Okay? If we knew exactly where it was going to rain, and exactly the time it was going to start, and exactly the time it was going to end, and how much rain was going to fall, then I could organize my day around that and not be affected at all by that rain. Okay? I would have loved to have that kind of knowledge when I was in high school, college, working in the summers. My dad had a ski boat, and I loved to ski, and I would ski on the weekends. It seemed like every Saturday it rained. Well, if I'd known that, I could have asked my boss for Friday off, gone skiing, and worked on Saturday. I didn't know that, though. You just don't know. That's the way life is. So we don't know God's ways. We don't understand His timing. We don't know everything He's doing and how everything impacts everything else. So we just don't know. So we should do what we know to do. Seed needs sowing. And when it's time to sow seed, the ground is warm and you've got moisture, you sow the seed. And so you sow the seeds wherever there's opportunity. And so it says, so you don't know which will prosper, this or that, whether they both will prosper. So sow your seed in the morning and sow some in the evening. In other words, don't try to outguess God. Don't try to outguess nature. Be wise. If there's obviously rain moving across the field, you can see it. Wait to sow. Sure, that makes sense. But in things where you just don't know and you can't tell, then you go ahead with what you know to do, and you have to leave it up to God. Very practical advice. That's a life of faith, okay? But not faith apart from reason, but faith within the reason of Ecclesiastes, that God's working it all, and if He's given you instructions and He says, I want you to be diligent in sowing, when it's time to sow and there's no clear reason not to, do it. And if it doesn't work out, that's God's business, and come out and do it again tomorrow. And so just some clarifying reminders about uncertainty. Because we do not know which God will prosper. We do not know how God is going to use our actions. So I go out and evangelize, some mission field. I don't know what's going to happen. There may be a great outbreak immediately of belief, and there may be years or decades where there's little or no obvious response. It's God's business. My business is just to be at what He has gifted me and called me to be at. And when He directs me otherwise, that's fine. But we don't have guarantees as far as outcome and timing. And that, of course, has been the basis of the whole question with regard to what Solomon is trying to find out in the book of Proverbs. So this is the way of joyful, responsible living. Okay, and it's not saying, oh, okay, I'm going to sow because I'm told to, but we're going to wipe it out like it was yesterday. No, it's supposed to be the joy of being able to sow, even though I don't know which of those seeds is going to grow. Okay, and that's what the book is about. You can't live life by trying to control the circumstances so everything feels good, because that's not the way life is. There are going to be some things that feel very, very bad, like when the wicked prevail over the good and treat them wrongly. Your response, is still to be in joy because God's called me and put me here and He's told me how to live, and I'll have to leave the unpleasant aspects of that to Him. So this is the way of joyful, responsible living. It makes sense from a business standpoint. It makes sense from the standpoint of an unbeliever who doesn't even believe there's a God there. But it makes it's different for us because it's not just to be a calculated thing to gain the most advantage, but it's to be something that I do enjoy because It's the life God's given me to live. And if I'm a farmer, I embrace it as a joyful exercise, even with all the frustrations. And there's tons of frustrations with farming, but there's frustrations with every line of work. And so that's what the book is about. So that's what he starts here in the first 6 verses of chapter 11, just with these little images about how to avoid inaction, how to get over that hurdle when I'm maybe being dissuaded emotionally or in some other way from doing what I need to do to carry on living. Now, when we move on from chapter 11:7 through chapter 12 and verse 8, we see his concluding focus on living responsibly. And he says here, "Truly the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to see the sun. Yes, if a man lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, not just the good years, all of them. But let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that comes is vanity, or subject to fuzziness or vaporousness with in regard to getting a hold of it." So what we're going to find here in verses 7 and 8 is that when life is full of sunny days, in which choices are clear-cut and outcomes pleasant, rejoice. But remember, there will be plenty of dark days as well. So again, it's just a balancing, basically given life as a good gift, and there's just going to be tons of enjoyable things about it in normal circumstances, and set your mind on that. But don't live the day just because of those. Live it because of me, and remember, there are going to be some dark times as well. Now, it's hard to know whether this it concludes the verses that were just before it, or whether it introduces the next. So it probably is. Remember the Janus verse looks both ways. The God of Janus, January, looks back to the year past and forward to the year coming. It probably is a transition statement. And note the big if, okay? Yes, if a man lives many years. No one, not even the wise, are guaranteed a long life. Most of us in this room have enjoyed a relatively long life. And we can say, it's been a good life. But there are a lot of people didn't get this far, okay? So there's no guarantee of a long life. So this is both a summary of the whole book, really looking back. He's been going over this kind of thing in one way or another. And it's a lead-in to to Solomon's final words in verses 9 through the end of the instruction in 12:8. So again, just one of those, there's things to rejoice about them. Some people have trouble rejoicing about the things that have happened that are good. Why? Well, I don't want to get used to this or rejoice about it, and something bad's going to happen. Yeah, it's the way we are as humans. We get these funny ways of reacting to things. So this is just one of the most positive books. It's couched in negative terms so often, but there's just so much positive in this book about the living of life joyfully, because God enables me to do that, even though there's going to be things in it that are not going to be pleasurable to experience. So in verses 9 and 10, in these concluding focus on living responsibly, he says, "Rejoice, young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. And walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, and know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from your heart, and put away evil from your flesh, for youth and the dawn of life are very fleeting." So what we see here in verses 9 and 10, there's a command to live joyfully and responsibly while at the height of one's vitality and opportunity, okay? So, that's, the energy of a five-year-old. You've around 5-year-olds, how many times you thought, oh man, I wish I had that kid's energy. I don't wish he had it. I wish, he had my energy and would calm down and I had his energy. I mean, there's just energy and vitality in youth, and that's the point. Because he's saying as you get older, and you all know that in this room, as you get older, You don't have as much vitality and energy to do anything, including enjoying the life that God gives. Now, that's not a spiritual comment. It's just a physical, thing that's just true of the whole process of aging. But I want you to note how youth is emphasized here at the beginning, at the end. Young man, in your youth, rejoice in the days of your youth, and for youth in the dawn of life. And so I'm going to come back to this because it's going to pick up on this in the last segments. But notice here there are 5 commands: rejoice, walk, know, remove, and put away. Okay. In other words, any situation you run into in life, one of these commands is going to be primary. Okay. Remove sorrow. The things that cause sorrow. Yeah. What are we supposed to do about it? Wallow in it? No. What's he say? Remove it. Okay. But how do you remove it? Well, the order of these commands is important. If you make as a general habit, as the number one habit of your life, the purpose to rejoice in the life that God has given to live, not just my eternal life, but the life now to live. If that's your focus, if that's your main perspective on each day, that's half the battle with dealing with sorrow, isn't it? Is just having and adopting and cultivating a positive mindset, a positive perspective. So, rejoicing, walking in the ways of your heart, and it'll come back to that. Note heart here. This paragraph commands a positive disposition, that is, the habit of aligning one's intellect, emotion, and will. When it uses heart in these contexts, it's looking at the totality of our processes. It's not the emotional thing that is in our culture. They used other organs for emotions. It wasn't the heart. But the heart had to do with just the totality of what I am as a thinking, moving, emotive being. Okay? So the habit of aligning one's intellect, emotion, and will around that which is good and beneficial as God sees it. Okay? So, and remember, that was an emphasis in the book. What is good? Good is that which is acceptable to God, that which is in like of God, and that which pleases God. And so again, there's this mindset. That and that alone results in the ways of the heart and the sight of the eyes aligning with what God determines to be good. So when he says walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, he's not saying make yourself the captain of your life. Make yourself how you're going to determine. Okay, it's not an individualistic. I'm on my own and I'll make out of life whatever I'm going to make out of it. If you're doing the rest of these things, then when you walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, you're going to be walking in a way that's conscious of God, that is delighting in Him, and that will reflect Him. So that's what we see here. That alone is what results in the ways of our heart and the sight of our eyes aligning with what God determines is good. And we'll see this emphasized again here coming up. And God is going to call on us to account for how well or poorly we've carried this out. Okay? So God gives us this life to enjoy and commands us to enjoy it. And when we get to the end of it, when we've finished it, you know what He's going to say? We come before Him. Well, how'd you do? How'd you do at rejoicing and enjoying the life I gave you to live? And that's kind of sobering. That's kind of sobering, isn't it? So here in verses 9 and 10, we see this command. It's not just I commend now. Now He's commanding. All right. And so throughout the book, he's saying, there's nothing better than to eat and drink and see the good in life and to rejoice and to joy. And then he commends, and now here he's commanding. So it's gotten stronger and stronger with regard to the directive of how we to approach life, how we are to approach life as he has talked about it. So that brings us to chapter 12. Chapter 12, which starts, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. Now this breaks down this whole passage in 3 sections, And they each begin with the word before. Before the evil days come, before the sun, the light, the moon, and the stars are darkened, and before the silver cloud is shattered. So basically here he's saying, remember your Creator. Now this remember is not just, bring it to mind. And I want you to notice this constitutes, this continues the directive to the youth. Remember in the days of your youth. I have a question here. How many of you, when you were a child, were taught the book of Ecclesiastes? Nobody. What is this in the verses we just say the book is addressed to? The youth. Why don't we do that? Huh? Because the book has been kind of covered over with misdirections. Why would I want to give my children this pessimistic view about how everything is meaningless? Well, what if that's not what the book is saying? And I can't imagine that this would be commanded to teach to children if that's what the book was about. Children aren't ready to sit down and think about, the whole thing with, just the pessimistic view of life, fatalism. No, it's about the positive enjoyment of life. I can mark out a particular point in my childhood where I needed somebody to sit down and talk to me about the book of Ecclesiastes. When I was young, I did some athletic things. I was a below average athlete in elementary school. I could run fast, but all that did was keep me away from my mother chasing me through the three acres of ragweed we lived on. But I was just a below average athlete. In 7th grade, I went out of the basketball team, and he had 12 jerseys, so he kept 13 players because myself and another were equally as bad. So we were 12 and 13, and we shared the jersey every other game and sat on the bench. Okay, that's where I was. And then in 8th grade, and we were two states away from there in by 8th grade. It was an interesting time. And so I'm on the 8th grade basketball team, another school, and they didn't cut anybody, so they're like 30 guys out there. They still only dressed like 12 or maybe 15, okay? So 10 that might play and 5 that would sit on the bench. And so they'd rotate those 5 uniforms through the rest of the 20 guys. And so finally, my number came up on the Saturday. I was going to get to dress and sit on the bench for the one game in my 8th grade basketball career. I wasn't going to play. I knew that. And so Friday night, I was all excited, and I started feeling bad. And I got sick. Not sick I physically got sick. Flu or something. And so my mom had to call the coach in the morning, Saturday, and say, I'm sorry, but Jimmy's not going to be able to come. I still Jimmy then because my dad was Jim. Okay, Jimmy's just not going to be able to come because he's not feeling well. And I can remember my mom hung up the phone. And I forget most of what I said and did in my childhood. But my cry was, why do these things always have to happen to me? Now, was I ready for the concepts of Ecclesiastes? Yeah, I did. I was ready. I was asking this why question that had at the heart, the universe seems unfair. And, what's wrong with me? Why are these bad things happening? Now, there's no way she could say, well, let me tell you why it's happening. But if she had known the book of Ecclesiastes, she could have said, well, let me just share here what the wisest man says about falling into situations that are painful and you just don't understand. Now, I felt that question earlier. My dad came down with polio when I was about 5. And, ceased becoming the active dad that I had known, and he survived, but his life was changed, and our lives were changed, and we started moving around. I didn't go to the same school 3 years in a row till I was in high school. We moved about every year and a half, and why did these things always have to happen to me? I graduated with a man from seminary back in the 70s, and he was married with a child at the time, and we were good friends. And I went to Illinois to work in a church, and he went to Iowa, university town, took pastor of a church, really great ministry. He had a college ministry that just was really, really taking off. And within 5 years of the time we graduated, he had contracted bone cancer, had his leg amputated, and died. Now, what sense does that make? I mean, the ministry that God had put in him, the blessing, his family. He was the nicest guy, most positive guy. And, just, Lord, what it just doesn't make sense. So, I mean, these are the things that the book of Ecclesiastes is designed to give us a perspective and to teach us. And this book says, youth, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And so, I was pondering this yesterday and last night, and I made myself another project. Once we finish up with this, I'm gonna go back to the commentary I've started writing on Ecclesiastes. I'm gonna write that commentary, and then I decided I'm gonna do a youth version. The youth need to know what these truths are, so you can begin to tell them. Yeah.
Same thing for Proverbs.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in Proverbs, you see it, and Proverbs are, we get our children into Proverbs very early on, because it says, look, my son, young man, a naive person emerging into adulthood, walk down this path. So that's done with Proverbs, but it's not done with Ecclesiastes. But what does Ecclesiastes say? It should be directed. It's a directing to those who are starting off in life. Get the right perspective on life. So when you run into these enigmas and it's applicable. They come home, oh, I'm in another group project. What's the matter? Well, because so-and-so's in my project, and I know he or she is not going to do any work, and they're going to get the same grade I did, and I'm going to do all the work. Is that fair? No. Huh? It's real. That's exactly right. And every child runs into those. Why does the bully, why does he keep doing all this stuff to people on the playground? Well, don't the teachers? Well, they talk to him, but it doesn't make any difference. And we can't do anything. The bully. Does Proverbs address that? Yeah, Proverbs addresses that. So it's just needed. It's needed on a general level, but this says this needs to be thought about and incorporated in earliest of years. So when we get here to the end, this is a directive to the youth, and what he's saying here basically is, before you get old and you lose the energy to really embrace life, do it at the other end. Learn to do it at the other end, because it's going to get harder and harder and more difficult. Now, the word remember here, again, is just not bringing to mind, but it means revering or fearing God, and we've seen that in the book. We've looked at that. Or serving Him, 9:1. Keeping His commandments, which are mentioned in the book and elsewhere in the Scriptures. So it's more than just bringing to mind. It's really the fear of the Lord again, in another term. Creator occurs only here in Ecclesiastes, and so I think it's meant to mean that I'm to reflect upon this life as from the standpoint of its originator. God bringing Adam and Eve to life and giving human beings the existence of life and all that comes from that, and then to live in such a way that I honor Him for that. And that's what Ecclesiastes does continually, is to focus upon God, the giver of life. God, the giver of life. God, the one who sustains you. God who has all the answers. God who knows what's gone past and can go back and address that when you can't. So just this focus on the God who is there and who knows all these things. So the remembering the Creator means to reflect upon all that life is by virtue of it coming from God, and then to live that life in honor of the one who gave it. And old age makes that kind of living more difficult. Now, we're not talking about spiritual IQ here. We're not talking about the waning of faith. We're just talking about the energy of life. Not just with regard to purposefully enjoying life, but with the ability to display that joy. With age, there's just less and less you can do and so forth. And so it's going to be a motivation here just in terms of just remember what's coming. It's just the natural process of degeneration. where, our faculties just aren't what they were. And so we're not going to be able to clue in on things as easily. Attention is, keep as long and so forth. So old age makes that kind of living more difficult. So we must reflect the Creator with all the energy of youth before those difficult days arrive. So what he's saying is the life that starts this whole process in youth is the life that's going to maximize its enjoyment of God's gift of the living of life, and is also going to maximize the ability to display that, to show that to others. So he does 3 sections here. Remember your Creator before the evil, difficult, miserable days come and the years draw near, when you say, I have no pleasure in them. So just remember before old age diminishes the positive feelings about the living of life that were more characteristic in the vigor of life. So this isn't talking about a jaundiced attitude toward God. It's not talking about the losing of faith or anything like that. It's just the plain common realization that as we get older, it's just harder to appreciate things. It's harder to keep the energy of appreciation up. It's just more difficult, and so that's what we see going on here. This is a general description of living as being mostly difficult due to the decreased capacities of old age. Okay, it's just the way life is. And most of us in this room don't have to think hard about that. It's just, just the way aging process is. Now, you have to remember here, and then the images that are going to come, modern old age does not have the same degree of incapacity that ancient peoples experienced, okay? No dentists. You didn't get knee replacements. You lived with the pain, okay? Whatever happened, you pretty much lived with it. We don't live with anything if we can help it now, and modern medicine and so forth have really lessened the negative impact of aging. So when you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm old, but I don't feel, that debilitated. That's great, okay? But if you live until your body just quits, you will get to that point closer and closer. So remember the context, and so these images are going to be in that regard. So first of all, before the difficult days come and the years draw near. So it's just, don't put off till everything else is done to enjoy life as God gives it, to honor God in the enjoyment of life. Do it right from the beginning. And then the second before is in verse 2. Before the sun, the light, and the moon, and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain, and the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look out of the windows are darkened, and the doors shall be shut in the street. Again, just poetry of the aging process. These kinds of old age difficulties before they take full effect. And there are just a variety of images involving both buildings and nature here, describing how the body deteriorates in old age. And remember, it's poetry. They would have understood these images. We don't have these things around and don't think in these terms. And so commentators have pondered this and debated, and I'm going to give you some suggestions that make sense, some sense to me. Verse 2 is an introduction to the effect that old age is a time of decreasing enjoyment of the general pleasantness of living. Isn't that true? Okay. I don't know, I'm not going to come up with specific illustrations. What's that? Some days, yeah, some days. And it's just, the sunrise just isn't as exciting sometimes as you get older. Now, it doesn't mean it's not, okay? That lights lift the spirit, but notice it says the sun seems to have disappeared. Now, note what's normal in songs and so forth. Clouds, rain, and then sun, okay? Clouds and rain, and then sun, okay? The sun will come out tomorrow, okay? What's this? Clouds, rain, clouds. It's trying to evoke the image. You get to a point in life where it just never seems completely sunny like it used to, okay? It's just the reality, all right? Just the reality. And so it's that natural gloominess. And again, it's not talking anything to do with the spiritual component here. And then it goes through some things. In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble. And various suggestions have been made. The keepers of the house, you go around doing, it's your arms, your hands, dusting and so forth. We all love to dust and vacuum, your arms, And if you had a house and you didn't have an arm or hand, you wouldn't be able to keep your house. So that makes sense, all right? The strong men could be the legs. They bow themselves, okay? The legs don't work like they used to. Mine don't. The grinders, the teeth, the grinders cease because they're few. Now remember, no dentist. If you didn't have a dentist, if you never went to a dentist, how many teeth would you have left? None? A lot of it is genetics, okay? Yeah. A lot of it is genetics. But, there wasn't fluoride to put in the water and toothbrushes and, water picks and stuff. I mean, people lost their teeth. So the grinders could be the teeth. And those who look out the windows are darkened. What's that probably? Eyes, yeah. Any in here not wearing glasses or need glasses? And the doors shall be shut in the street. Somebody suggested that this is the lips closing over your mouth because your teeth aren't there. Anyway, again, it's just images that they would have understood that have to do with just the natural deterioration of our bodies, which do affect how we enjoy life. Okay? That's the only point that's making. Then he says, when the sound of the grinding is low. Now here it's grinding again, but he's talking about the grinders are gone. The sound of grinding is low. And somebody has suggested that the loudest sound that would be in a village would be the sound of grain being ground with the big stones and the horses and so forth. They didn't have factories. They didn't have, music playing and that sort of thing. And so that's been suggested. And we're moving here from body parts more to experiences. The sound of grinding could be the loudest thing in town, so it's talking about a lessening of hearing. And one shall rise up with the voice of a bird. I used to be able to sleep till 7, 8 o'clock. I'd hardly make it to 5 anymore. Just, you get woken up. And the daughters of music shall be brought low, the ability to distinguish nuance of tone and hear clearly words of music. Anybody have trouble with that as you get older? Yep. They're afraid of heights, more terrors in the way. If you get older, you're just more nervous about walking around and, heights and things getting after you. The almond tree, some have suggested the hair turning white. Most of us know that about. The grasshopper shall be a burden. Now, and this is somebody suggested this. I don't know what else to do with it. Grasshoppers usually have both wings and legs. But if you just had the legs of a grasshopper, it'd be difficult to get around. Okay, and so it could be making that point. And my legs feel like that sometimes. And as old age, that's what we all say. We don't have the best equipment for walking anymore, like we used to. And desire shall fall, just appetites of one, and then man goes to his everlasting home. It's just talking about death. So just as death approaches, we just have less and less capacity to fully enjoy life as we've been instructed and to manifest the joy of life, okay? So it has nothing to do with their spiritual condition. It just has to do with our condition in age. And then finally, he says, before the silver cord is severed, the golden bowl is broken, the pitcher is broken at the spring, the wheel broken at the cistern. Probably just physical death here is being referred to as the unrecoverable loss of light and water. The silver cord may be what's holding a bowl lamp. When that bowl is crushed, its particular light is extinguished forever. Okay, so if light is a symbol of life, the instrument that holds that life is crushed. So the body dies. When instruments to draw water from a spring or cistern are broken, whatever life that depended on that source ends. So you can see how these could be images of death. So it likely describes physical death as the permanent ceasing of the individual's capacity to enjoy and display the gift of life as referred to throughout the book. Now, this is not to negate the concept of an afterlife in Ecclesiastes or the Old Testament. Remember, Ecclesiastes uses death not as a transfer of, place, but as not living. Because it means you're not enjoying life. You're not manifesting life. And so I think that goes on in here as well. And there it is. So then he concludes, and this has really been the punctuating all the way through. Thinnest of vapors, all is a puff of breath. So just a summarization here of what's going on. The context has been determinative in the application of this statement. Of course, in an absolute sense, it had to do with the fruitless pursuit of Solomon to understand the providence of God. But in a relative sense, it's been applied to certain experiences and situations in life that are inexplicable given what is known about the ways of wisdom, like the good dying young and the wicked prolonging their lives and their wickedness. I just don't know how to grasp that. It just seems so bad and so unfair. Well, that just leaves us with the epilogue of the book. And we really have a double epilogue here. He was really wise. His words really do tell us what we need to know about appropriating the gift of life that we have under the sun. And just breaking it into the two parts. Further, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. He sought to find out acceptable words and that which was written blamelessly, words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads and like nails, well fastened are words from the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. So note here that the preacher, the wise, the masters of assembly, shepherd, these are all having to do with Solomon's role here. His role as a convener into an assembler into the presence of God was what was suggested was the meaning of the word kohelet, which is the Hebrew word often translated preacher. Solomon is never named by name in here, but his role is indicated. He was adept at wisdom and wisdom writing. His teaching was without fault. Notice, acceptable words, written blamelessly, words of truth. Now, this is interesting. Most books don't have appendices like this, okay? Or epilogues, okay? Why do you suppose this book had an epilogue like this? How long do you suppose it was before somebody was taking this book in the wrong way? We've seen how easily it is to misconstrue the more negative statements. And so it's not impossible that very early on, somebody who did understand the book felt that this should be appended. Now, it became part of Scripture. I think that's part of God's sovereign work, and we have that in some instances in things like, Moses didn't write about his death after the fact, and yet you have that as part of inspired Scripture. And so it's emphasizing the fact that these are words of truth, and that they are intended to goad us into experiencing the joy of living our present life on earth. Why would we need to be goaded in that regard? Well, because we tend to equate the enjoyment of life with smooth circumstances. And Solomon says, no, the enjoyment of life is accepting life as a gift of God and looking to Him to enable you to process it and to utilize it, to enjoy it, and to live it to His honor and glory. And those are two entirely different things. He goes on then, furthermore, my son, be admonished of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. There are endless distractions that keep us from understanding and applying Ecclesiastes. You know what the biggest, one if not the biggest sections in a bookstore is? Self-help books. Just whatever you want to be or become, somebody's written on how to do it. Or several people have written on how to do it. Okay? And so, forget those as far as living life. Ecclesiastes is about how to live life. In the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. The fear of the Lord is taught in all the rest of the Word of God, is taught in all the rest of the Word of God, and it really sums up what Ecclesiastes is all about. It occurs 7 times in the book, the fear of the Lord. It's not just an afterthought at the end, and we had a whole session on looking at the fear of the Lord. God will inquire of us just how well we paid attention to Solomon's teaching in this book. This basically is the Old Testament version of the Bema, the judgment seat of Christ. Second Corinthians says, "Will all appear to determine what we have done in the body, whether good or bad." And so, this is life and how to live life, and God's going to hold us accountable for that. So, just looking at our 3 segment statement of the book, frustrated in his exhaustive efforts to understand God's providential design as it impacts our earthly experience. 3:15, he has set eternity in their hearts, yet so that man can't find out the work that God has done from the beginning to the end. That's the frustrating aspect of his work. He concludes that one must still enjoy life as a gift from God. 8:15, I commended joy, because a man has no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be joyful, for that will accompany him in his labor all the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. And that's one of the 6 refrains in the book. And then all the while living it responsibly by trusting in the one to whom he must ultimately give account. All has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man, for God will bring every work into judgment. So that's my take on the book of Ecclesiastes. I hope you've benefited from it, and it will lead you to just continually reading it and using it and sharing it. And like I said, I want to continue to figure out ways to do that myself.